Every morning at Pinewood Senior Living Center began the same way. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment, the quiet shuffling of feet, and the gentle voice of Sarah Hayes greeting each resident with a warm smile. At 32, Sarah possessed a natural beauty, chestnut hair neatly tied back, kind hazel eyes, and graceful movements that inspired trust. For 6 years, she had worked as a caregiver at this Boston facility, beloved by residents and respected by staff alike. Yet behind her gentle demeanor lay an untold story, a woman who had grown up in the foster system, bouncing between homes until she aged out at 18, with no family to call her own. "You're a blessing, dear," Mrs. Peterson said, patting Sarah's hand during morning care. Sarah smiled, though the compliment stirred a familiar ache. While she'd built a life for herself, a small apartment, a job she loved, even a few close friends, there remained an emptiness where family should have been. No roots, no history, no connections. "Nurse meeting in 5 minutes," called Diane, the head nurse. "We're getting a new resident today. VIP situation, apparently." The morning meeting was brief. A new resident was arriving. Mr. Robert Ellison, 78, transferring from Massachusetts General Hospital following a heart attack. A retired surgeon with significant financial resources, which explained the rush to prepare the center's premium suite. "Sarah, you'll be his primary caregiver," Diane announced. "His family specifically requested our best." "Me?" Sarah asked, surprised. VIP assignments usually went to caregivers with nursing credentials. "Yes, you. Your patient satisfaction scores are the highest in the facility." The morning passed in a flurry of preparation. Sarah ensured the premium suite was perfect. Fresh flowers, orthopedic bed positioned for an optimal view of the gardens, temperature precisely at 72 degrees. At 2 p.m., the entrance door slid open. Sarah stood alongside Diane and the facility director as an ambulance crew wheeled in a stretcher carrying an elderly man with a dignified face. Behind them walked a tall man in an expensive suit, clearly the son, judging by the striking resemblance. "Welcome to Pinewood, Mr. Ellison," the director greeted. "I'm David Wilson, and this is our head nurse Diane Collins, and this is Sarah Hayes, who will be your father's primary caregiver." The younger Mr. Ellison, James, as he introduced himself, nodded politely but distractedly, his attention focused on his father's comfort as they transferred him to a wheelchair. "My father's recovery is my top priority," James stated, his voice carrying the confident tone of someone accustomed to being in charge. "I've researched every facility in the area, and Pinewood came highly recommended." Sarah waited patiently as the medical handoff was completed. When the formalities concluded, it was finally time to escort Mr. Ellison to his room. "I'll take him from here," Sarah said with a reassuring smile, moving to take position behind the wheelchair. That's when it happened. As Sarah stepped forward into his line of sight, the elderly man's eyes widened. His weathered hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, and his breathing quickened. Sarah immediately checked his oxygen levels, concerned. "Mr. Ellison, are you all right? Are you in pain?" she asked, kneeling to his eye level. But Robert Ellison wasn't experiencing a medical emergency. Instead, tears welled in his pale blue eyes as he stared at her with an intensity that made Sarah uncomfortable. His hand, trembling slightly, reached toward her face but stopped short of touching her. "I know who you are," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. The room fell silent. James stepped forward, concern etched across his features. "Dad, what's wrong?" But the elderly man couldn't tear his gaze from Sarah's face. "All these years, I never thought—" His voice caught, and a tear slid down his cheek. Sarah glanced uncertainly at Diane, who looked equally confused. "Mr. Ellison, I'm Sarah Hayes. I'll be taking care of you during your stay with us." "No," Robert said, shaking his head slowly. "You're Elizabeth's daughter. You have her eyes. Her exact eyes." Sarah felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. Elizabeth, a name she'd seen only once, on her original birth certificate before entering the foster system at 3 months old. Elizabeth Hayes. I don't understand, Sarah stammered. You wouldn't remember me, Robert continued, but I delivered you into this world 32 years ago. I was there when you were born. I was your mother's doctor. James placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Dad, you're confused. You've been through a lot. I'm not confused, Robert insisted. I would never forget those eyes. Or that birthmark. He gestured to the small crescent-shaped mark just visible on Sarah's wrist. Sarah instinctively covered the birthmark. She'd always had it. A small crescent moon that foster parents had called her lucky charm. How do you know about my birthmark? She asked, barely above a whisper. Because I noted it in your birth record, Robert replied. And because your mother had the same one, in the exact same place. The world seemed to slow around Sarah. For someone who had spent a lifetime with questions about her origins, the coincidence was too profound to dismiss. My mother? You knew my mother? The question came out as a plea. Robert nodded slowly. Elizabeth Hayes was a nurse in my department, one of the best I ever worked with. His eyes clouded with memory. She was alone when she had you. No family, no support. She was determined to give you a better life than she could provide. Sarah felt her chest tighten. These were details she'd never known. What happened to her? Robert's expression darkened with regret. There were complications after your birth. He paused. She made me promise something if I ever encountered you. A promise I've carried for 32 years without hope of fulfilling. What promise? She asked, her voice stronger now, driven by a lifetime of wondering. Robert Ellison's eyes filled with tears again, but this time accompanied by a smile. She made me promise to tell you that you were loved. More than anything in this world, you were loved. The following hours passed in a blur. Sarah continued her shift mechanically while her mind raced with questions. The facility director had suggested she take the day off, but Sarah refused. Work was her anchor, the one constant in a life suddenly thrown into chaos. James Ellison found her during her break, standing alone by the garden windows. My father would like to speak with you further, when you have time, he said. His earlier businesslike tone softened. He's been asking for you. I've spent my entire life not knowing where I came from, Sarah replied. And now, suddenly... I understand this is unexpected, James said. But my father is not a man given to flights of fancy. If he says he knew your mother, I believe him. After her shift ended at 7, Sarah found herself standing outside Robert Ellison's door. She had changed from her scrubs into jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down from its usual bun. She knocked softly. Come in, called Robert's voice, stronger than before. The premium suite was spacious, with large windows overlooking gardens bathed in golden sunset. Robert sat in an armchair, a photo album open beside him. Sarah, he greeted her with a genuine smile. Thank you for coming. Mr. Ellison? Robert, please, he insisted. Sarah nodded, taking the chair across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. I owe you answers, Robert finally said, his hands resting on the photo album, and perhaps an apology for the shock of my recognition. Tell me about her, please. Robert's expression softened. Elizabeth Hayes was 26 when she joined my surgical team as a scrub nurse. Brilliant, dedicated, with extraordinary compassion. He carefully opened the photo album. This was our team, 1992. Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. And there she was, a young woman in scrubs with dark hair, a heart-shaped face, and unmistakably the same hazel eyes. Elizabeth Hayes looked directly at the camera with a confident smile. She was beautiful, Sarah whispered. She was, Robert agreed. When she announced her pregnancy, she was determined to continue working as long as possible. No one knew who your father was. Elizabeth never said. Sarah nodded. You said there were complications. Yes. Elizabeth developed severe preeclampsia. We had to perform an emergency C-section. You were born healthy, 5 pounds, 8 ounces. Robert's expression grew somber. Elizabeth's condition deteriorated rapidly. In her final hours, her only concern was you. Sarah felt tears forming. She made me promise 2 things, Robert continued. First, that I would ensure you went to a good home. And second, that if our paths ever crossed, I would tell you that you were loved beyond measure. Sarah brushed away tears. Did you ensure I went to a good home? Robert's gaze fell. I tried. I made arrangements with a colleague and his wife who couldn't have children. They were eager to adopt you. His voice grew heavy. But there was a terrible car accident just weeks after they took you home. Both were killed instantly. Sarah's breath caught. I never knew. The system took over then. You disappeared into foster care before I could intervene. I searched for years, but privacy laws. He shook his head. Eventually, I had to accept that finding you was beyond my reach. A silence fell between them, filled with the weight of what might have been. There's more, Robert said eventually. Elizabeth left something for you. He reached for a small wooden box on the side table. I've carried this with me for 32 years, hoping against hope that somehow, someday, he opened the box and removed a simple gold locket. This was your mother's. Inside is a picture of her holding you, the only one ever taken. With trembling hands, Sarah accepted the locket. She carefully opened it to find a tiny photograph. Elizabeth, looking exhausted but radiant, cradling a newborn wrapped in a white blanket. On the opposite side was an inscription. To my daughter, love transcends all boundaries. There's a letter too, Robert said, removing an envelope from the box, its edges yellowed with age. Elizabeth wrote it the night before your birth, almost as if she sensed what would happen. Sarah stared at the envelope, her name written in flowing script on the front. Her real name, not just Sarah, but Sarah Elizabeth Hayes, written by her mother's hand. I can't believe you kept these all these years, she whispered. I made a promise, Robert said simply. And now, in the most unexpected way, I've finally fulfilled it. Sarah carefully placed the letter in her lap, too overwhelmed to read it just yet. But why are you here? At Pinewood, of all places. Robert smiled sadly. Life has a strange way of coming full circle. I developed heart problems several years ago. My son researched the best facilities for cardiac recovery. And here we are. He looked at her with wonder. Of all the caregivers, in all the facilities, in all the world, you were assigned to me, Sarah finished, a smile breaking through her tears. I don't believe in coincidences, not anymore, Robert said. James thinks I'm being sentimental, but a surgeon learns to trust his instincts. James had been hovering near the doorway, giving them privacy while remaining supportive of his father. Now he stepped forward. Actually, I've been making some calls while you two talked. There's something you should know, Sarah. Both turned to look at him. Dad wasn't the only one searching for you, James explained. Elizabeth Hayes has a sister, your aunt. She's been looking for you for decades. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. I have an aunt? James nodded. Margaret Hayes. She lives in Chicago now. When Elizabeth died, Margaret was overseas with Doctors Without Borders. By the time she returned and learned about you, you had already disappeared into the system. She's still alive? Sarah asked, barely daring to hope. Very much so. I spoke to her briefly on the phone. She's catching the first flight to Boston tomorrow morning." For the first time in her life, Sarah called in sick the next day. After a nearly sleepless night spent reading and rereading her mother's letter, pages of hopes, dreams, and love from a woman she'd never known, Sarah felt both emotionally drained and strangely energized. The letter revealed so much. Her mother's childhood in rural Maine, her struggle through nursing school, her passion for medicine, and most importantly, her unwavering love for the daughter she knew she might never raise. Elizabeth had written of her hopes for Sarah's future, her wishes for her happiness, and her deepest regret, that she might not be there to witness the woman her daughter would become. Now Sarah sat in the small coffee shop across from Pinewood, nervously checking her watch every few minutes. James had arranged for his father's medical team to visit in the morning, giving Sarah and her aunt privacy for their first meeting. Margaret Hayes was scheduled to arrive at 10. It was now 9:55. Sarah had dressed carefully, a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, her mother's locket around her neck. She'd even applied light makeup, something she rarely bothered with for work. The bell above the coffee shop door jingled, and Sarah's head snapped up. A woman in her early 60s entered, looking around uncertainly. She was slim and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair cut in a practical bob. Despite the age difference, the family resemblance was unmistakable. Sarah stood slowly, her heart hammering. The woman's eyes found hers, widened, and then filled with tears. "Sarah?" she asked, her voice catching. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Margaret crossed the space between them in quick steps, and then hesitated, as if unsure whether to embrace her. Sarah made the decision for her, stepping forward into her aunt's arms. "Oh my God," Margaret whispered, holding her tightly. "You look so much like her, so much like Lizzie." They stood like that for a long moment before separating, both wiping away tears. They sat, each studying the other's face. "I've been searching for you for 30 years, Margaret said, her voice steadier now. "Every database, every adoption registry, every lead, no matter how small." "I had no idea," Sarah replied. "I thought I was alone in the world." Margaret reached across the table and took Sarah's hands in hers. "You were never alone. Not for a single day. I never stopped looking." They ordered coffee, though neither seemed particularly interested in drinking it. Margaret pulled a worn leather photo album from her bag. "I brought some pictures. I thought you might want to see." For the next hour, Sarah absorbed her family history through photographs. Her mother as a little girl with pigtails, as a teenager with braces, as a young woman in her nursing uniform. And Margaret, always at her side, the protective older sister. "We were close," Margaret explained. "Just the two of us after our parents died. I was 22, Lizzie was 16. I put my plans on hold to raise her." "You did?" Sarah asked, touched by this sacrifice from a woman who had been a stranger just hours ago. Margaret nodded. "Best decision I ever made. I went to medical school later, after Lizzie was established in her nursing career." Her expression darkened. "I was in Sudan when she died. I didn't even know she was pregnant. If I had been there, you couldn't have known," Sarah said gently. "When I returned and learned what happened, I was devastated. Not just losing Lizzie, but learning I had a niece who had disappeared into the system." Margaret's eyes became fierce. "I fought for years with social services. By the time I got any information, your adoptive parents had died, and you'd been placed in foster care under a different case number. The trail went cold." Sarah thought about all the foster homes, all the years of loneliness, all the while having an aunt who had been searching for her. The knowledge was both comforting and painful. "What about my father?" Sarah asked the question that had been haunting her since Robert's revelation. Did my mother ever tell you who he was? Margaret's expression grew complicated. That's a difficult question, Sarah. Lizzie made choices that I didn't always understand, but I respected. Please, Sarah pressed. I need to know. Margaret sighed deeply. Your mother fell in love with a married man, her supervising doctor during her residency. He promised to leave his wife, but when Lizzie became pregnant, he panicked and denied everything. Was it Robert Ellison? Sarah asked, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. No. God, no. Margaret looked genuinely shocked. Robert was Lizzie's mentor, her protector. He was furious when he found out who the father was and what he'd done. She hesitated. It was William Harrington, chief of cardiology at Mass General at the time. The name meant nothing to Sarah, yet it represented half of her genetic heritage. Is he still alive? No, Margaret said flatly. He died about 15 years ago. Heart attack, ironically. Did he ever try to find me? To acknowledge me? Margaret squeezed Sarah's hand. He denied your existence until his dying day, even when Robert confronted him directly. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is that we've found each other. They spoke for hours, filling in the decades of separation with stories. Margaret's work around the world with Doctors Without Borders, her current position as a professor of tropical medicine at Northwestern, her small but comfortable home in Chicago, with a guest room that, she emphasized, would always be open to Sarah. I never married, never had children, Margaret explained. My students became my family, my work my purpose. But I never stopped looking for you, never stopped hoping. As afternoon stretched toward evening, they finally left the coffee shop and walked together toward Pinewood. Sarah felt as though she was introducing Margaret not just to Robert, but to a part of her past that was only now becoming clear. There's something I need to ask you, Sarah said as they approached the entrance. Something I've been wondering all day. Anything, Margaret replied. Would you consider, that is, would it be okay if I came to Chicago? Not just to visit, but maybe to stay, to get to know you properly. The words tumbled out in a rush. Margaret stopped walking, turned to Sarah, and cupped her face gently. Nothing would make me happier. Nothing in this world. When they entered Robert's suite, they found him sitting up, looking stronger than the day before. James stood by the window, ending a phone call as they entered. Margaret, Robert said, his eyes lighting with recognition. It's been too long. 32 years, Robert, she replied, but without bitterness. She approached his chair, and to Sarah's surprise, leaned down to embrace him warmly. Thank you for keeping your promise. I wish I could have done more, Robert said, regret evident in his voice. You did what you could, Margaret assured him, taking a seat beside his chair. And now, by some miracle, we're all here. James cleared his throat. Actually, that might not be entirely a miracle. All eyes turned to him. I've been making some inquiries. It seems that when Dad was selecting a care facility, he specifically requested patient satisfaction reports. The administration provided profiles of their top caregivers. Robert looked confused. I don't remember that. You were heavily medicated at the time, James explained. But you saw Sarah's profile, just her first name and a small photo. You insisted on Pinewood after that, though you couldn't articulate why. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You recognized me even then, unconsciously? The mind is a powerful thing, Robert said softly. Perhaps some part of me knew. 3 months passed with remarkable swiftness. Winter settled over Boston, transforming Pinewood's gardens into a wonderland of snow and frost. Inside, Robert Ellison continued his recovery, growing stronger each day under Sarah's care. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have predicted. Sarah remained his primary caregiver, maintaining professional boundaries during working hours, but their connection transcended the typical patient-nurse dynamic. Robert had become a link to her past, a connection to the mother she'd never known, and something of a father figure. Margaret extended her stay in Boston, taking a sabbatical from her teaching position to rent a small apartment near Pinewood. She and Sarah spent every available moment together, building the relationship they'd been denied for decades. They discovered shared traits, a love of classic films, an inexplicable dislike of celery, the same distinctive laugh. On a crisp December morning, Sarah entered Robert's suite to find him dressed not in his usual pajamas and robe, but in slacks and a sweater, sitting in his armchair with an air of expectancy. "Good morning," she said, surprised. "You're up early. I have a proposition for you," Robert announced without preamble. "James and I have been discussing my future care." Sarah felt a twinge of anxiety. Was he planning to transfer to another facility? "Oh? I'm well enough now to leave Pinewood," he continued. "My cardiologist has cleared me for regular life, provided I maintain my medication regimen and don't overexert myself." "That's wonderful news," Sarah said, ignoring the pang of sadness at the thought of his departure. "James has suggested I move in with him, but..." Robert made a face. His condo has 3 flights of stairs and he works 16-hour days. Not ideal for an old man. Sarah nodded, waiting for him to continue. "Meanwhile, Margaret tells me she's invited you to Chicago and you're considering accepting." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "I've already given notice here. I'm leaving at the end of the month." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Which brings me to my proposition. What would you think about coming to work for me? Not as a caregiver exactly, but as a personal assistant and companion. I have a house on Cape Cod, 1 floor, lovely views of the ocean. There's a guest house that would be yours entirely." Sarah blinked in surprise. "I don't understand." "I'm offering you a job, Sarah, a well-paid one," Robert said directly. "I need someone I trust to help manage my affairs, accompany me to appointments, ensure I'm taking care of myself. In return, you'd have the guest house, a generous salary, and plenty of free time to pursue whatever education or interests you might wish." "But, Margaret, Chicago." "Already discussed," Robert said with a small smile. "The Cape is a short flight from Chicago. Margaret could visit often, and you could spend holidays with her. She agrees it's an excellent opportunity." Sarah sat down, overwhelmed by the offer. "This is very generous, but you're wondering why," Robert finished for her. "It's simple, really. I failed Elizabeth. I failed you once before. I won't fail either of you again if I can help it." "You didn't fail anyone," Sarah protested. "I did," Robert insisted. "I should have fought harder to find you after your adoptive parents died. I let bureaucracy defeat me. I won't make that mistake again." His eyes, still sharp despite his age, held hers. "This isn't charity, Sarah. I need help, genuinely. And you need time. Time to figure out your future. Time to build relationships with what family you have left." Sarah considered his words carefully. The offer was tempting. More than tempting. She'd already decided to leave Pinewood, drawn by the promise of family with Margaret. But Chicago was unfamiliar, and she'd need to find work, an apartment, build a life from scratch. "What about your son?" she asked. "Would he be comfortable with this arrangement?" "It was partly his idea," Robert admitted. "James worries about me living alone, but he knows his lifestyle can't accommodate my needs. He suggested a live-in assistant. I merely suggested it be you." The door opened then, and James entered carrying a cardboard tray with 3 coffee cups. Margaret followed behind him, her expression both anxious and hopeful. "Has he asked you?" Margaret inquired immediately. "You really did discuss this," Sarah said, looking between them. "Extensively," James confirmed, handing out the coffees. "Dad's stubborn as a mule about maintaining his independence, but he needs support. And frankly, knowing your connection, He hesitated. It seems like more than coincidence. It feels right. The guest house is lovely, Margaret added. Robert showed me pictures, and the Cape is beautiful year-round. You're all in on this, Sarah observed, feeling a strange mixture of amusement and emotion. We are, Robert acknowledged, but the decision is entirely yours. No pressure, no obligations. Sarah sipped her coffee, buying time to think. These 3 people, strangers just months ago, had become her family in all the ways that mattered. The universe had brought them together in the most unlikely way, offering her not just a connection to her past, but a path to her future. When would you want me to start? She asked finally. Robert's face lit up. Is that a yes? It's a tell me more, Sarah clarified, but she was smiling now. I need details before I can decide. For the next hour, they discussed logistics, salary, generous, duties, reasonable, living arrangements, ideal, time off, ample. By the time they finished, Sarah found herself not just convinced, but excited by the prospect. So, Robert said as their discussion wound down, have we persuaded you? Sarah looked around at these 3 faces, all watching her with such hope and affection. For a woman who had spent her life feeling untethered, the sensation of being wanted, of being valued beyond her professional capabilities, was overwhelming. Yes, she said simply. I accept. The weeks that followed were a flurry of activity. Sarah gave formal notice at Pinewood, packed her modest apartment, and made arrangements to relocate to Cape Cod. Robert's house, a beautiful cedar-shingled cottage overlooking the Atlantic, was being prepared for his return, with modifications for his comfort and safety. On her final day at Pinewood, Sarah completed her rounds with mixed emotions. She had loved her work here, found purpose in caring for others. Yet the future beckoned with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. As she entered Robert's suite for the last time as his caregiver, she found him standing by the window, stronger now than when he had arrived 3 months earlier. Ready for our new adventure? He asked, turning to face her. I think I am, she replied. He studied her face for a moment. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become, Sarah. I wish she could see you now. Sarah touched the locket at her throat, Elizabeth's locket, which she had worn every day since Robert gave it to her. Sometimes I think she can, she said softly. Robert smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. As a scientist, I should tell you that's improbable. As a man who has witnessed the impossible, finding you after all these years, I'm inclined to believe you might be right. Outside, snow began to fall, large flakes drifting past the window and settling on the grounds of Pinewood. A clean slate, a fresh beginning. Sarah watched the snow with a sense of peace she had never known before. I never believed in fate, she said quietly, until you recognized me that day. I'm glad I did, Robert replied. Though I suspect that even if I hadn't, we would have found each other eventually. Some connections are simply meant to be. Sarah nodded, thinking of her mother's words in the letter she now knew by heart. Love finds a way across time and distance. Remember that, my darling daughter, and never lose hope. For the first time in her life, Sarah Hayes was not just a caregiver, but someone who was cared for. Not just a woman with no past, but one with a future rich with possibility and connection. The circle that had begun 32 years ago in a hospital delivery room had finally, miraculously, been completed. As she helped Robert gather his few remaining belongings, Sarah felt not like she was leaving one job for another, but like she was finally, after a lifetime of searching, coming home.